The UFC has two rules that would have gotten you laughed out of ancient Greece. No eye gouging, no biting. That's it. Those are the only two things Pankration, the original combat sport invented 2,700 years ago, considered unsporting. Everything else was legal: chokes, joint locks, stomps to a downed opponent, fingers into wounds, headbutts. If you could do it with your body, you could do it in the arena. Pankration was an Olympic sport. It debuted at the ancient Olympics in 648 BC and ran continuously for over 1,000 years. The men who competed in it were celebrated as the greatest athletes in the ancient world. More than sprinters, more than wrestlers, more than any other competitor. And almost nobody today knows it existed. Today we're going to fix that. Because the story of Pankration is the story of where every combat sport you've ever watched actually came from. The name Pankration comes from the Greek words pan, meaning all, and kratos, meaning power or strength. All power. Total combat. The Greeks were not being subtle about what this was. In practice, Pankration combined wrestling and striking into a single discipline with almost no restrictions. You could punch, kick, elbow, knee. You could take the fight to the ground and choke your opponent unconscious. You could hyperextend joints until they submitted, or until they broke. You could strike a grounded opponent. You could grab a limb and wrench it in directions limbs are not designed to go. The only prohibited techniques were eye gouging and biting. And even these rules were apparently not always strictly enforced. Ancient sources describe competitors losing eyes in competition. The rules existed on paper more reliably than in practice. There were no weight classes, no time limits in the early period, no rounds. You fought until one man submitted, indicated by raising a finger, or was rendered unconscious, or was physically unable to continue. In some recorded bouts, competitors died. This was not considered a scandal. It was considered the ultimate expression of athletic excellence. The ancient Olympics already had wrestling and boxing as separate events. Pankration was considered the superior discipline precisely because it required mastery of both, plus the tactical intelligence to combine them in real time. Greek wrestling, pale, was a standing discipline. You won by throwing your opponent to the ground 3 times. Ground fighting was minimal. Boxing, pygmachia, used leather straps wrapped around the hands and forearms and was purely striking, no grappling. Pankration abolished these artificial separations. A pancratist had to be able to strike, wrestle, and fight on the ground with equal competence. Specializing in one area was a liability. Your opponent would simply take the fight to the domain where you were weakest. Modern MMA coaches who have studied ancient Pankration techniques, and several have, describe the tactical framework as essentially identical to what elite mixed martial artists do today. The specific techniques evolved. The strategic logic did not. Pankration bouts at Olympia took place in the Skama, a specially prepared pit of sand and loose earth, designed to cushion falls and, perhaps more importantly, to coat both competitors in grit that made gripping easier and more painful simultaneously. Competitors fought naked and oiled, standard for Greek athletic competition. The oil served multiple purposes. It protected the skin, made certain holds harder to maintain, and, when mixed with the sand of the Skama, created a gritty coating that made any strike or grab abrasive. There was a referee, the umpire or Hellenodikes, who carried a rod and was authorized to beat competitors who broke the 2 rules. Watching ancient pottery depictions of Pankration, you can sometimes see the referee in the background, rod raised, watching for violations. The crowd at Olympia could number in the tens of thousands. Pankration bouts were among the most attended events at the Games. The champions became famous across the Greek world, celebrated in odes by Pindar, commemorated in statues, granted privileges in their home cities that we would today associate with professional athletes. Theagenes of Thasos is one of the most decorated athletes in ancient history, and almost nobody outside of classical studies has heard of him. He competed at the ancient Olympics and other Panhellenic Games from approximately 480 to 450 BC. Ancient sources credit him with 1,400 victories across his career, in both boxing and Pankration. Now, that number almost certainly includes victories at smaller regional games, not just the major Panhellenic festivals. But even discounted heavily, the competitive record is staggering. He won the Pankration at Olympia. He won the boxing. At the Pythian Games at Delphi, he won both. At the Isthmian and Nemean Games, he piled up victories across decades. He competed into his 40s. Extraordinary longevity for a contact athlete in any era. After his death, his home city of Thasos erected a bronze statue in his honor. According to the historian Pausanias, a man who had a grudge against Theagenes began going to the statue at night and flogging it. The statue eventually fell on him and killed him. The Thasians, interpreting this as divine justice, threw the statue into the sea. Their crops then failed. An oracle told them to retrieve the statue. Fishermen eventually netted it from the seafloor and returned it. The crops recovered. This is how seriously the ancient Greeks took their Pankration champions, not just as athletes, as figures with almost divine power. This is the story I need you to understand is completely real. It is documented by multiple ancient sources. It happened. Arrichion of Phigalia was the reigning Pankration champion at Olympia. A two-time Olympic winner defending his title in 564 BC. In the final bout, his opponent got behind him and locked in a chokehold. What we would today call a rear naked choke. Arrichion was losing consciousness. In his final moments, before blacking out entirely, Arrichion managed to grab his opponent's foot and twist. He hyperextended the ankle, or dislocated it, sources differ, with enough force that his opponent in agony raised his finger to submit. The submission signal was acknowledged. Arrichion had won. Arrichion was dead. The choke had killed him in the same moment he applied the ankle lock. He had submitted his opponent and died simultaneously. The judges awarded the victory to Arrichion's corpse. His body was crowned with the olive wreath. He was announced as Olympic champion. His dead body was carried back to Phigalia as a hero. The philosopher Philostratus later wrote about this bout at length, describing it as the perfect expression of Pankration's values. That victory and death were both acceptable outcomes, and that the spirit of competition could transcend even the moment of dying. In the UFC, a fight stops when someone goes unconscious. In ancient Pankration, it continued after someone died, and the dead man could still win. These are different sports. Dioxippus was the Pankration Olympic champion of 336 BC. He was part of Alexander the Great's inner circle, one of the celebrated athletes and companions who traveled with the Macedonian army on its conquest of Persia and beyond. At a banquet in Persia, a Macedonian soldier named Choragus challenged Dioxippus to a fight. Choragus was a veteran soldier, heavily built, celebrated for his martial ability. He would fight in full armor with weapons. Dioxippus would fight naked and unarmed. The entire army attended. Alexander watched. Dioxippus waited for Choragus to throw his javelin, stepped aside, let it pass. When Choragus closed with his spear, Dioxippus snapped the shaft. When Choragus reached for his sword, Dioxippus tackled him, took him to the ground, put a foot on his neck, and looked at Alexander for instruction. The army, Macedonian soldiers who had conquered half the known world, cheered at the unarmed athlete who had just dismantled one of their own. Choragus was released. He later died, apparently by suicide, from the humiliation. This is what Pankration training produced. Not just sport, not just performance. An unarmed man who could defeat an armed soldier in front of an army and make it look effortless. Alexander the Great was not just a fan of Pankration. He was a serious student of it. His education under Aristotle included physical training in Greek athletic disciplines, and Pankration was central to Macedonian military preparation. When Alexander's army swept east through Persia, Central Asia, and into India between 334 and 323 BC, they brought Pankration with them, wherever Hellenistic culture took root. In Egypt, in Persia, in Bactria, in the Punjab. Greek athletic culture followed. Gymnasiums were built. Games were organized. Pankration was practiced. Some historians of martial arts have argued, speculatively but not unreasonably, that the spread of Greek grappling techniques into Central and South Asia through Alexander's campaigns may have contributed to the development of wrestling traditions in those regions. The evidence is circumstantial, but the geographic and chronological overlap is real. What is documented is that Pankration spread across the Hellenistic world and remained a major athletic and military training discipline for centuries after Alexander's death. It's important to understand that Pankration was not purely a sport. It was considered essential military training. The hoplite, the standard Greek soldier, fought in a phalanx formation with spear and shield. But phalanxes broke. Battles devolved into close-quarters chaos, where weapons became useless, and what mattered was what you could do with your body against another body. Pankration training prepared soldiers for exactly that scenario. The ability to strike effectively, take someone to the ground, choke, or break a limb in the middle of a battlefield melee. These were practical military skills, not athletic abstractions. Spartan warriors were noted for their wrestling and grappling training. The Spartans actually prohibited their citizens from boxing. They considered it too passive, a discipline where you could simply cover up and survive. Pankration, where passive defense was not a viable strategy, was preferred. The line between athlete and soldier in the ancient Greek world was much thinner than we imagine today. The Olympic champions were not entertainers. They were the physical ideal the culture was trying to produce. Here is the irony at the heart of this story. Pankration, one of the most violent sports ever institutionalized, was banned not for being too brutal, but for being associated with the wrong culture. Rome conquered Greece in the 2nd century BC and absorbed Greek culture wholesale. Roman elites admired Greek philosophy, Greek art, Greek architecture, but they had complicated feelings about Greek athletic culture. Greek-style athletic nudity, in particular, was deeply uncomfortable to Roman cultural sensibility. Roman combat entertainment ran toward gladiatorial combat. Armed, often to the death, staged for maximum spectacle. Greek pankration. Unarmed, decided by submission or unconsciousness, governed by at least nominal rules, was considered almost restrained by comparison. Romans who attended Greek games reportedly found the submissions anticlimactic. They wanted blood. The ancient Olympics continued under Roman rule until 393 AD, when the Emperor Theodosius I, a Christian emperor determined to eliminate pagan religious practices, banned the Olympic Games entirely. The Games had been held every 4 years without interruption for over 1,000 years. Theodosius ended them with a single edict. Pankration disappeared with them. The gymnasiums that had trained its practitioners were closed or repurposed. The tradition of competitive pankration, which had survived for over a millennium, was extinguished within a generation. Here's where it gets interesting. Pankration didn't entirely vanish. It went underground, regionally, and arguably never fully stopped. In Greece, a folk wrestling tradition called pale persisted through the Byzantine and Ottoman periods that incorporated many Pankration elements. In the mountains of Crete and the Peloponnese, grappling traditions with striking components survived in rural communities for centuries after the Roman ban. More significantly, there is a serious academic argument that Pankration, as it spread through the Hellenistic world, contributed genetic material to combat traditions across Asia. The judo historian Don Draeger and others have documented the spread of Greek wrestling techniques along Alexander's conquest routes. Whether you find this argument convincing depends on how much weight you give circumstantial geographic evidence. But the question is live in the academic literature. What is unambiguous is this. In 1896, when the modern Olympic Games were revived in Athens, Pankration was not included on the program. The International Olympic Committee has debated its re-inclusion multiple times. As of today, it remains outside the Olympics. Though it has a competitive governing body, the World Pankration Athlema Federation, and holds world championships. The people who compete in those championships use a rule set that, while not identical to the ancient version, is closer to it than any other mainstream combat sport. More than wrestling, more than judo, more arguably than MMA. Because even MMA has more rules than ancient Pankration did. When the UFC held its first event in 1993, it was marketed as a radical new concept. No rules, no limits, pure combat to determine which martial art was truly superior. The tagline was literally, "There are no rules." Except, there were 2 rules. No eye gouging, no biting. Those are exactly the same 2 rules Pankration had. In 648 BC, the UFC's founders thought they were inventing something new. They were reinventing something 2,700 years old. The format, the logic, even the specific rule exceptions. Identical. The ancient Greeks got there first, ran it for over 1,000 years, produced champions whose feats are still documented, and then had it taken away from them by an emperor who considered it pagan. Every time you watch an MMA fighter take an opponent down and work for a rear naked choke, you are watching a technique that was practiced in the scammer at Olympia. Every time a fighter defends a takedown and looks for a clinch, that defensive posture has a 2,000-year history. The athletes are different. The sport is the same. Pankration is not a curiosity from a dead civilization. It is the ancestor of every no-holds-barred combat sport on Earth. It just never got the credit. Arrichion of Phigalia died winning an Olympic gold medal and was carried home a hero. Theagenes of Thasos accumulated over 1,000 victories and became so celebrated that his statue was believed to have healing powers. Dioxippus dismantled an armed soldier with his bare hands in front of Alexander the Great's entire army. These men competed in a sport that the ancient world considered the ultimate test of human physical capability. A sport with two rules. A sport that ran continuously for over 1,000 years before a Roman emperor shut it down because he didn't like what it represented. And then almost everyone forgot it existed. If this is the kind of history that fills in the gaps, the stories that explain where the things we take for granted actually came from, subscribe. I've got more of this coming, and some of it is going to genuinely surprise you. Thanks for watching.